Hello, everyone. I know many of you listen while falling asleep, letting these mysteries carry you into the night. Before you drift off, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe, it helps me bring you more cases like this one. Now let's get comfortable, relax, take a deep breath, and dive into tonight's case. Center County, Pennsylvania, is the kind of place where people know their neighbors, where Main Street still matters, and where the changing seasons paint the landscape in vivid colors. Nestled in the heart of Pennsylvania, this region is home to Penn State University, rolling farmland, and tight-knit communities where trust runs deep. In the spring of 2005, the county was emerging from a harsh winter. The trees were budding with new leaves, the air carried the fresh scent of rain and earth, and the days were growing longer and warmer. It was the kind of season that promised renewal, hope, and new beginnings. April 15, 2005 dawned bright and clear. For most people, it was just another day marking the end of the work week, a chance to plan weekend adventures or simply relax. The temperature was mild, the sky was blue, and everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Ray Grikar had plans for that day, simple plans, uncomplicated plans. He told his girlfriend, Patty Fornicola, that he was going to take a drive, maybe head over to Lewisburg, a small town about 50 miles away. Known for its antique shops and quiet streets, he seemed relaxed. There was nothing unusual in his demeanor, nothing that raised any red flags. "I'll be back later," he told her. Those would be the last words Patty would ever hear from the man she loved. Ray left his home in Bellefonte around 11:30 that morning, driving his red Mini Cooper, a distinctive car easily recognizable. He didn't take much with him, no luggage, no extra clothes, just himself, his cell phone, and his laptop. Hours passed, the afternoon stretched into evening. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Ray didn't come home. Patty wasn't immediately alarmed. Ray was an independent man, someone who valued his solitude. Maybe he'd stopped somewhere longer than expected. Maybe he'd decided to grab dinner out. Maybe he'd simply lost track of time. But as the evening deepened into night, and night became the early hours of the next morning, worry began to creep in. Ray still wasn't home. Patty tried calling his cell phone, no answer. She tried again and again. Each call went straight to voicemail. The silence on the other end was deafening. By Saturday morning, Patty knew something was wrong. This wasn't like Ray. He was reliable, predictable. He didn't just disappear without a word. She picked up the phone and called the police. "I need to report a missing person," she said, her voice tight with fear. "My boyfriend, Ray Grikar. He left yesterday morning and never came back." The call was logged at 20:00 a.m. on April 16, 2005, and so began one of the most perplexing missing persons cases in Pennsylvania history. To understand the mystery of Ray Grikar's disappearance, you first need to understand who Ray Grikar was. Raymond Francis Grikar was born on October 9, 1945 in Cleveland, Ohio. He came from a working-class family, the kind of family that valued hard work, integrity, and education. Ray was a bright child, curious and determined. Even as a young boy, he showed a keen interest in justice, in fairness, in making sure the rules were followed. He excelled in school, earning a spot at Cleveland State University, where he studied with a focus and discipline that impressed his professors. But Ray didn't stop there. He had bigger ambitions. He wanted to make a real difference in the world, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. After completing his undergraduate degree, Ray attended the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. It was the late 1960s and early 1970s, a time of social upheaval, civil rights movements, and a growing awareness that the justice system needed people who truly cared about fairness. Ray graduated from law school in 1972, armed with a degree, a sharp legal mind, and an unshakable belief in the power of the law to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. He began his career as a public defender, representing those who couldn't afford legal counsel. It was grueling work, long hours, low pay, and emotionally draining cases. But Ray loved it. He loved being in the courtroom, loved the challenge of defending the underdog, loved knowing that he was making a tangible difference. But as the years went by, Ray's perspective began to shift. He saw too many guilty people walk free on technicalities. He saw victims who never got justice. He saw a system that, while designed to be, felt broken. In 1985, Ray made a significant career change. He joined the Center County District Attorney's Office as an assistant DA. It was a complete reversal. Instead of defending the accused, he would now be prosecuting them. And he was good at it. Very good. Ray quickly gained a reputation as a tough. He didn't grandstand. He didn't play to the cameras. He simply built solid cases, presented clear evidence, and let the facts speak for themselves. His conviction rate was colleagues respected him deeply. In 1985, just months after joining the DA's office, Ray was appointed as the Center County District Attorney, a position he would hold for the next 20 years. 20 years of prosecuting criminals. 20 years of making enemies. 20 years of knowing secrets that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. Ray Gricar was 59 years old when he disappeared. He was nearing retirement, looking forward to a quieter life. He had a girlfriend he loved, a daughter he adored, and hobbies he wanted to pursue. He collected vintage cars, enjoyed reading, and loved exploring small towns looking for antiques. Those who knew Ray described him as intelligent, reserved, and methodical. He wasn't the kind of man who acted impulsively. He thought things through. He planned. He was careful. He was also intensely private. Ray didn't share his feelings easily. He kept his thoughts close to his chest. Even those closest to him sometimes felt like they only knew parts of who he really was. But one thing was certain: Ray Gricar was respected. In a career spanning decades, he had built a reputation for fairness, for thorough investigations, for never cutting corners. He was the kind of man you could trust, which is what made his disappearance so shocking. How does a man like Ray Gricar, careful, methodical, predictable, just vanish into thin air? On the surface, Ray Gricar's life seemed stable. He had a successful career, a loving relationship, and was on the verge of a well-deserved retirement. But as investigators would later discover, there were cracks beneath that calm exterior. Small fissures that suggested all was not as peaceful as it appeared. The first crack: Ray had been talking about retirement more frequently in the months leading up to his disappearance. This wasn't unusual. He was 59, he'd served as DA for 2 decades, and it was natural to start thinking about the next chapter. But some colleagues noticed that Ray seemed tired. Not physically exhausted, but emotionally drained. The job had taken its toll. Being a district attorney in a college town came with unique pressures. Penn State University dominated Center County, and with tens of thousands of students came inevitable legal issues, drug cases, assaults, thefts, and more serious crimes. Ray had to navigate the delicate balance between prosecuting criminals and managing the political pressures that came with such a high-profile institution in his jurisdiction. And then there were the cases that haunted him. In 1998, Ray had made a decision that would later become one of the most controversial moments of his career. He had declined to prosecute Jerry Sandusky, a Penn State assistant football coach, on charges of child sexual abuse. The details of that decision were murky. A mother had reported that Sandusky had behaved inappropriately with her son. An investigation was conducted, but in the end Ray decided there wasn't enough evidence to pursue charges. Years later, after Ray's disappearance, Jerry Sandusky would be arrested and convicted of sexually abusing numerous children over decades. The scandal would rock Penn State and raise uncomfortable questions about why Sandusky hadn't been stopped sooner. Did Ray's decision not to prosecute weigh on him? Did he regret it? Did someone connected to that case want him silenced? We'll explore that connection later, but it's important to note this decision was made 7 years before Ray vanished. At the time of his disappearance, Sandusky was not yet publicly accused, and the massive scandal had not yet broken. Still, it was one crack in the picture of Ray's otherwise stable life. Second crack. Ray had been acting slightly different in the weeks before he disappeared. Patty Fornicola, his girlfriend of 7 years, later told investigators Ray had seemed distracted. Not upset exactly, but preoccupied. Like his mind was somewhere else. She mentioned that he'd been on his computer more than usual, sometimes late at night. When she asked what he was working on, he'd give vague answers. Just looking into some things, he'd say. Nothing important. Ray had also made some unusual internet searches in the weeks before his disappearance. Investigators would later recover fragments of his search history. Among the searches, how to destroy a hard drive, how to fry a laptop, and various searches about leaving the country without a passport. These searches painted a troubling picture. Was Ray planning something? Was he researching how to disappear? Third crack. Ray was financially comfortable but not wealthy. He earned a decent salary as DA, but he wasn't extravagant. He lived modestly, saved carefully. But in the months before he vanished, Ray had made some unusual financial moves. He hadn't withdrawn huge sums of money. There was no smoking gun like emptying bank accounts. But he had been more secretive about his finances. He'd mentioned to Patty that he was organizing his affairs, which she assumed was normal pre-retirement planning. Or was Ray preparing for something else? Fourth crack. Ray's relationship with Patty seemed solid on the surface. They'd been together for years, and by all accounts, they cared deeply for each other. But they didn't live together. Ray valued his independence, his space, his privacy. Patty later admitted that there were parts of Ray's life she didn't fully understand. He could be distant sometimes, lost in thought, unreachable even when sitting right next to her. Ray also had a daughter, Laura, from a previous marriage. He loved her deeply, but their relationship was complicated. Laura would later become one of the most vocal advocates for finding her father, but in the months before his disappearance, they hadn't been in touch as frequently as usual. Had something changed? Had Ray been pulling away from the people closest to him? And then there was the fifth crack, the one that few people knew about. Ray's older brother, Ray Kerr, had died by suicide in 1996. Roy had struggled with depression for years. One day, he simply couldn't bear the weight anymore. He took his own life, leaving behind devastated family members and unanswered questions. Ray rarely spoke about his brother's death. He kept that pain private, locked away. But those close to him knew it had affected him deeply. Did Ray carry a genetic predisposition to depression? Did he struggle with dark thoughts he never shared? Did the anniversary of his brother's death, or the accumulated weight of decades of prosecuting horrific crimes, finally become too much? These cracks didn't prove anything. They were just hunts, shadows, small inconsistencies in the life of a man who was otherwise steady and predictable. But in hindsight, they mattered. Because on April 15, 2005, Ray Gricar drove away from his home and never returned. And every one of these cracks would be examined, analyzed, and debated as investigators tried to answer one simple question. What happened to Ray Gricar? To understand what happened to Gricar, we need to carefully reconstruct his final known day, April 15, 2005. Every movement, every decision, every small detail matters because somewhere in this timeline lies the answer to his disappearance. Let's walk through that day step by step. Ray Gricar woke up that Friday morning in his apartment in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. It was a comfortable place, modest but well kept, reflecting Ray's practical nature. The morning was unremarkable. He had breakfast, got dressed casually. This wasn't a work day for him, though as DA he was never truly off duty. Patty Fornicola was there with him. They'd spent the night together, as they often did, even though they maintained separate residences. The relationship worked for them, close but not suffocating, loving but respectful of each other's independence. Around La Vaugeron, Ray mentioned he was thinking of taking a drive. Where to? Patty asked. Maybe Louisburg, Ray replied. Just feel like getting out for a bit. Look around. Maybe stop at some antique shops. Louisburg was about 50 miles east of Bellefonte, a charming small town along the Susquehanna River. It was known for its historic downtown, quaint shops, and peaceful atmosphere. Ray had been there before. He enjoyed browsing antique stores, looking for interesting finds, old books, vintage items, pieces of history. Patty offered. Ray smiled but shook his head. I'll be fine. Just need some time to think. I'll be back later. There was nothing unusual in this exchange. Ray often took solo drives. He was an introspective man who valued solitude. At approximately 11:30 a.m., Ray walked out to his car, a red 2004 Mini Cooper S. It was a distinctive vehicle, eye-catching and sporty, not the kind of car you'd expect a 59-year-old district attorney to drive. But Ray had always had a fondness for unique cars. The Mini Cooper was fun, different, and he enjoyed driving it. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and backed out of the parking space. Patty watched from the window as the red car disappeared down the street. She had no idea she would never see Ray Gricar again. Ray headed east on Route 192, a scenic route that winds through central Pennsylvania's countryside. The drive from Bellefonte to Lewisburg typically takes about an hour, depending on traffic and how fast you drive. The day was beautiful, temperature in the mid-60s, sunny with scattered clouds. The kind of day that makes you want to roll down the windows and feel the breeze. The roads were relatively empty. Most people were at work. The countryside rolled past farmland, small towns, patches of forest still showing the bare branches of early spring. We don't know what Ray was thinking during this drive. Was he relaxed, enjoying the scenery? Was he troubled, working through some problem in his mind? Was he planning something? His cell phone was with him, turned on. But he didn't make any calls during the drive. He didn't receive any calls either. At least none that investigators could later verify. The Mini Cooper was equipped with a manual transmission. Ray preferred driving stick shift. It gave him more control, made the drive more engaging. His hands on the wheel shifting through gears, eyes on the road ahead. Somewhere during this drive something changed. Because Ray Gricar never made it to Lewisburg. Here's where the timeline becomes crucial and deeply puzzling. At approximately 20:45 p.m., a witness spotted Ray's distinctive red Mini Cooper in Lewisburg. But here's the detail that would haunt this investigation: Ray wasn't alone. The witness, whose identity has been protected, reported seeing the red Mini Cooper parked on Market Street in downtown Lewisburg. They noticed it because of its distinctive color and style. You don't see many Mini Coopers in small Pennsylvania towns. But what caught their attention even more was the fact that there were two people in the car. The witness described seeing a man matching Ray's description in the driver's seat. And in the passenger seat, there was a woman. The witness couldn't provide a detailed description of the woman. They only saw her briefly and from a distance. Dark hair, possibly. Average build. No distinguishing features that stood out. This sighting was reported to police later, after Ray was declared missing, and it has never been fully explained. Who was this woman? Patty was at home in Bellefonte. It wasn't her. Ray's daughter Laura was elsewhere. It wasn't her. So who was the mystery woman in Ray Gricar's car? Was she a friend, a colleague? A romantic interest Patty didn't know about? Or was she something more sinister, someone who lured Ray to Lewisburg for reasons we still don't understand? The witness was certain about the timing. Between 20:30 and 30:00 p.m., the location was specific Market Street in the downtown area, and they were absolutely certain it was Ray's car. The red Mini Cooper was too distinctive to mistake. But here's the problem: no other witness ever came forward to confirm seeing Ray with a woman that day. No surveillance cameras captured them together. No one else reported seeing the two of them. Was the witness mistaken? Did they see someone who looked like Ray but wasn't actually him? Or did they see exactly what they reported, Ray Gricar with unidentified woman, hours before he vanished? After the sighting on Market Street, Ray Gricar's movements become a complete mystery. We don't know where he went. We don't know what he did. We don't know if he was still with the mystery woman or if he was alone. His cell phone didn't ping any towers that would help triangulate his location. Either the phone was turned off, or he was in an area with poor reception. He didn't use his credit cards. He didn't withdraw cash from any ATMs. He didn't make any purchases that investigate for theater trace. For 3 hours, maybe more, Ray Gricar simply existed in a void. No evidence, no witnesses, no trace. What happens during these missing hours could be the key to everything. Did Ray meet with someone? Did he go somewhere specific? Did he make a decision that changed everything? Or was something done to him during this time? Something that prevented him from ever coming home? At some point during the evening of April 15th or the early morning hours of April 16th, Ray Gricar's red Mini Cooper was left in a parking lot. Not in Lewisburg, not in Bellefonte, but in a small town called Lewisburg, specifically in the parking lot of an antique store on Market Street, the same general area where he'd been spotted with the mystery woman. Wait, let me correct that. The car was actually found in a different location that would deepen the mystery even further. The red Mini Cooper was discovered in a parking lot on East Water Street, right along the Susquehanna River. It was parked in a spot near the street of shops, a small antique mall. The car was locked. There were no signs of struggle, no broken windows, no damage to the exterior. Inside, investigators found Ray's cell phone on the passenger seat, just sitting there, powered off or dead. But Ray's laptop, which Patty confirmed he'd taken with him, was missing. Also missing Ray's wallet, his driver's license, and Ray himself. The car's position was odd. It was backed into the parking space, which was unusual for Ray. He typically pulled in forward. Small detail, perhaps, but investigators noted it because Ray was a creature of habit. The parking lot where the car was found was not particularly secluded. It was in plain view, near businesses in the street. During business hours, people would have been walking by regularly. But the lot was also near the Susquehanna River, a detail that would become critical later. When was the car left there? The parking lot didn't have overnight restrictions, so it could have been there since Friday evening, or it could have been left there early Saturday morning. No one could say for certain. Multiple people had walked past the red Mini Cooper without thinking anything of it. Why would they? It was just a parked car. It wasn't until Patty reported Ray missing on Saturday morning, and police began searching for his vehicle, that the car was identified and secured as evidence. When police located Ray's car on Saturday, April 16th, they immediately secured the scene and began processing it for evidence. The first thing they noticed, the car was clean, too clean. No signs of struggle, no blood, no torn fabric. No indication that anything violent had occurred inside the vehicle. The cell phone on the passenger seat was examined. It had been turned off, whether by Ray or someone else. Investigators couldn't determine. The call log showed nothing unusual. The last calls made were routine, nothing that suggested distress or emergency. But the missing laptop was concerning. Why would Ray leave his cell phone but take his laptop? Or had someone else taken the laptop after Ray left or abandoned the car? The car's fuel level was checked, still plenty of gas. Ray hadn't run out of fuel and found himself stranded. The trunk was searched. Empty except for the usual items you'd find in a car. Emergency kit, some papers, nothing unusual. Investigators dusted for fingerprints. They found Ray's prints, of course, all over the driver's side, steering wheel, door handle, gear shift. Exactly what you'd expect. But they also found something else. Faint prints on the passenger side. Smudged, partial, difficult to lift cleanly. They couldn't get a clear enough sample to run through databases. But the presence of prints suggested someone else had been in the car recently. Was it the mystery woman from the sighting? Or had someone else been there? The discovery of the car created more questions than it answered. If Ray had intended to disappear voluntarily, why leave his car in such an obvious location? Why not drive it somewhere more remote, where it wouldn't be found for weeks or months? If Ray had been abducted or harmed, why was the car left so carefully locked and undamaged? Why leave the cell phone behind as if to say, "Here, this is where the trail ends"? And most troubling of all, where was Ray Griccar? With Ray missing and his laptop unaccounted for, investigators and that the computer could hold crucial information. Emails, documents, search history, anything that might explain what Ray was thinking or planning. But the laptop was gone. Police issued bulletins describing the missing computer, a Toshiba laptop, silver in color, standard model. They asked the public to be on the lookout for it. Days passed, then weeks, no sign of the laptop. And then, months later, something extraordinary happened. When Patty Fornicola called police at 20:00 a.m. on April 16, 2005 to report Ray missing, the authorities took it seriously but not urgently. Here's why. Ray Carr was a 59-year-old man, not a child or a vulnerable person. He'd been gone less than 24 hours. He was the district attorney, a position of authority and responsibility. Adults have the right to go where they please without checking in. The initial assumption was that Ray had perhaps stayed overnight somewhere, that he'd turn up with a reasonable explanation. But Patty was insistent. This isn't like him, something is wrong. Her concern elevated the response. By mid-morning on Saturday, officers were actively searching for Ray's vehicle. The red Mini Cooper was distinctive enough that it shouldn't be hard to find. And indeed, by Saturday afternoon, the car had been located in Lewisburg. Once the car was found without Ray, the case shifted. This was no longer just a missing person who might turn up embarrassed. This was something more serious. The car was transported to the state police forensics lab. Every inch was examined. Meanwhile, investigators began retracing Ray's known movements. Patty was the last person known to have seen Ray. Naturally, she was interviewed extensively. She told investigators about Ray's plans to drive to Lewisburg. She described his demeanor that morning: normal, relaxed, nothing unusual. She mentioned that Ray had seemed a bit preoccupied in recent weeks, but nothing that alarmed her. Investigators asked about their relationship. Was it stable? Any arguments? Any reason Ray might want to leave? Patty was adamant their relationship was good. They loved each other. Ray had no reason to just disappear. He was planning for retirement, she told them. He was looking forward to it. Why would he run away from that? Investigators also asked Patty about Ray's mental state. Did he seem depressed? Had he ever mentioned suicide? Patty hesitated at this question. She knew about Ray's brother Roy, who had taken his own life. She knew that depression could run in families. Never talked about hurting himself, she said carefully. But Ray, he kept things inside. If he was struggling, he might not have told me. This answer troubled investigators. It didn't rule out suicide as a possibility. Police spoke with Ray's colleagues at the Center County District Attorney's office. Everyone described Ray the same way: professional, thorough, dedicated. A bit reserved but well respected. Had anyone noticed changes in Ray's behavior recently? Some colleagues admitted that Ray had seemed tired. One mentioned that he talked about retirement more frequently. Another recalled Ray saying something cryptic: "I'm ready for a change." But no one reported anything that suggested Ray was in crisis or planning to vanish. Investigators also looked into Ray's caseload. Were there any particularly sensitive cases? Any threats against him? Any criminals who might want revenge? As a district attorney for 20 years, Ray had prosecuted countless people. Drug dealers, violent offenders, white-collar criminals. Many of them were now in prison, and some had made threats over the years. But none of the threats seemed recent or credible enough to warrant immediate concern. Still, investigators compiled a list of individuals who might have a grudge against Ray. It was a long list. Police obtained warrants to examine Ray's financial records. They needed to know if Ray had been preparing to disappear. What they found was inconclusive. Ray's bank accounts showed normal activity. No large withdrawals, no unusual transfers. His savings were intact. However, investigators noted that Ray was careful with money. If he had been planning to disappear, he was smart enough to accumulate cash slowly, in amounts that wouldn't raise red flags. They checked his credit card statements. Nothing unusual in the weeks before his disappearance. No purchases that suggested planning, no airline tickets, no hotel reservations in distant cities, no survival gear. But here's what bothered investigators. Ray had about $60 in cash in his wallet when he disappeared. That's it. If he was planning to start a new life, he'd need far more than $60. Unless he had cash hidden somewhere that no one knew about. While Ray's laptop was missing, investigators were able to access some of his internet search history from his home computer. What they found was deeply troubling. In the weeks and months before his disappearance, Ray had searched for it. How to fry a hard drive, how to destroy a laptop, water damage to computers, replace hard drive. These searches suggested Ray was researching how to make a computer unrecoverable. Why would he need to know this? There were also searches related to leaving the country. Countries without extradition. Living abroad without passport. How to disappear. These searches painted a picture of someone how to vanish. But here's the complication. As a district attorney, Ray might have been researching these topics for legitimate reasons, related to cases he was working on. It was impossible to know for certain whether the searches were personal or professional. Still, the combination was suspicious. Ray's cell phone, found in his car, was sent to forensic analysts. The phone records showed that Ray had not made or received any calls on April 15th after leaving home. The last call had been late the previous evening, a routine call to Patty. Text messages were examined. Nothing unusual, no cryptic messages, no goodbye notes. The phone had been powered off, intentionally, it seemed, rather than the battery dying. This suggested one of two things: either Ray turned off his own phone, perhaps to avoid being tracked, or someone else turned it off after gaining access to his car. Investigators descended on Lewisburg, interviewing shopkeepers, residents, anyone who might have seen Ray on April 15th. They showed Ray's photo everywhere, at antique shops, restaurants, gas stations, hotels. A few people thought they might have seen him, but no one could be certain. It's difficult to remember a specific person from a specific day, especially when you're asked weeks later. The witness who reported seeing Ray with a woman came forward during this canvass. This sighting was investigated thoroughly. Police tried to identify the woman. They checked Ray's phone records for any female contacts he'd been in communication with. They looked at his email. They asked everyone who knew Ray if he'd mentioned meeting anyone. Nothing. The mystery woman remained unidentified. Some investigators wondered if the witness had been mistaken. Perhaps they'd seen someone who resembled Ray, or perhaps they were misremembering the date. But the witness was adamant. They knew what they'd seen. During the investigation, Ray's decision not to prosecute Sandusky in 1998 came up. At the time of Ray's disappearance in 2005, Sandusky was not yet publicly accused. The massive Penn State scandal wouldn't explode until 2011, but investigators noted the 1998 case in their files. Could Sandusky or someone protecting Sandusky? The theory seemed far-fetched at the time. The 1998 investigation had concluded years earlier. Ray hadn't been actively pursuing anything related to Sandusky. Still, it was noted as a possible avenue if other leads dried up. Ray's car had been found near the Susquehanna River. This proximity was not lost on investigators. Could Ray have jumped into the river? Could he have walked to the water's edge and ended his life, following in his brother's tragic footsteps? Search and rescue teams were deployed. Devers searched the river near where the car was found. Boats dragged the river bottom. Helicopters scanned from above. They found nothing, no body. No evidence that Ray had ever entered the water. But the Susquehanna River is large with strong currents. If someone had entered the water, their body could be carried miles downstream. It could get caught in debris under water structures, or simply decompose beyond recognition. The river search continued for days, then weeks. Eventually it had to be scaled back. They couldn't search forever. No trace of Ray Griccar was found in the river. 3.5 months after Ray Griccar disappeared, a fisherman made a discovery that would reignite the investigation and deepen the mystery. It was a warm summer afternoon. The Susquehanna River flowed gently past Lewisburg, its surface reflecting the afternoon sun. A local man had come to the riverbank to fish, hoping for a quiet afternoon and maybe a good catch. He cast his line into the water, settled into his spot, and waited. The river had given up nothing related to Ray Griccar during the extensive searches in April and May. Devers had conned the bottom. Boats had dragged nets, nothing had been found. But on this particular day, the river decided to reveal a secret. The fisherman noticed something in the shallow water near the bank, partially submerged, caught against some rocks. At first he thought it was just debris, trash that had been thrown into the river or washed downstream. But something about it caught his attention. It looked deliberate, manufactured. He waded into the shallow water and reached down. His hands closed around something hard, rectangular, covered in mud and river sediment. He pulled it from the water and immediately recognized what he'd found. A laptop computer. Not just any laptop, a Toshiba laptop, silver in color, matching the exact description of Ray Griccar's missing computer. The fisherman's heart raced. He'd been following the news about the missing DA. Everyone in the area had. And now, here in his hands, was potentially the most crucial piece of evidence in the entire case. He immediately contacted the police. The location where the laptop was found was significant and deeply troubling. It was discovered in the Susquehanna River, approximately 100 yards from where Ray's car had been parked back in April. Not miles away, not in some random location, but right there. Near the parking lot where the Mini Cooper had been found, the laptop had been in the water for over 3 months. It was covered in silt, algae, and river debris. The casing was intact, but water had clearly penetrated the device. Investigators carefully bagged the laptop as evidence and transported it to the forensic lab. Everyone had the same question. What information could be recovered from this water-damaged computer? The laptop arrived at the Pennsylvania State Forensic Lab. Computer forensics experts examined it carefully. Their findings were devastating. The hard drive was missing. Not destroyed by water, missing. Removed. When someone had opened the laptop casing, physically removed the hard drive from its mounting, and taken it. The empty bay where the hard drive should have been was obvious to the forensic technicians. This was not accidental damage from being in the water. This was deliberate removal. The implications were staggering. If Ray had thrown his laptop into the river in a moment of despair before taking his own life, why would he first remove the hard drive? If someone had harmed Ray and disposed of evidence, why throw the laptop in the river but keep the hard drive? Why not destroy both completely? The missing hard drive suggested premeditation, planning. Someone, whether Ray himself or someone else, had wanted to ensure that whatever information was on that computer could never be recovered. Investigators examined the laptop casing carefully. There were no fingerprints. The water had washed everything clean. There were no tool marks that might indicate forced entry or tampering. The hard drive had been removed carefully, properly, by someone who knew what they were doing. When was the hard drive removed? This became the crucial question. Was the hard drive removed before the laptop was thrown into the river? Or had someone retrieved it from the river, removed the drive, and then thrown it back? The fisherman who found the laptop said it appeared to have been submerged for a long time. The amount of algae and sediment suggested it had been there for months, not days. But here's the problem: the laptop was found in relatively shallow water, in a spot that had been searched multiple times during the initial investigation. How had search teams missed it? Some investigators believe the laptop might not have been in the river the entire time. Perhaps it was thrown in later, after the intensive searches had concluded. Perhaps someone held on to it, removed the hard drive, and then disposed of the laptop in July, knowing it would eventually be found but would yield no useful information. Or perhaps the laptop had been there all along, just lodged in a spot that searchers missed, gradually working its way to the shallower area where the fishermen eventually spotted it. There was no way to know for certain. Finding the laptop without its hard drive meant investigators now had to search for two separate items: Ray Gricar himself, and the hard drive that might explain everything. The river was searched again. Divers went back into the water, this time looking specifically for a small rectangular hard drive. They found nothing. The hard drive could be anywhere. If it had been thrown into the river separately, the currents could have carried it miles away. It could be buried in river sediment. It could have been carried all the way to the Chesapeake Bay. Or it might not be in the river at all. Someone could have taken it, destroyed it, kept it, hidden it somewhere far from the river. The hard drive became a holy grail in the investigation, the one piece of evidence that might answer every question. But it was gone. To this day, the hard drive has never been found. While the laptop itself yielded no data, forensic teams examined it for other evidence. They tested for DNA. After 3 months in the river, biological evidence would be severely degraded, but sometimes traces could still be found. They found nothing conclusive. The water had been too destructive. They examined the laptop for any trace evidence, fibers, anything that might have transferred from whoever last handled it. Again, the river had washed everything away. The laptop, despite being found, provided no real answers. It was a tantalizing clue that led nowhere. By the fall of 2005, 6 months after Ray's disappearance, the investigation had hit a wall. Despite extensive searches, interviews with hundreds of people, forensic analysis, and countless investigative hours, police were no closer to finding Ray Gricar or determining what had happened to him. The evidence was contradictory. The car was left neatly, suggesting deliberate abandonment. The laptop was found nearby but stripped of its hard drive. The cell phone was left behind, turned off. Ray's wallet and ID were missing. A witness claimed to have seen Ray with an unidentified woman. Ray's internet searches suggested he'd been researching how to disappear. But there was no financial preparation, no clear motive for voluntary disappearance. The case didn't fit any single explanation cleanly. Lead investigators met to discuss theories. What were they dealing with? The suicide theory was one of the first considered, and it remained a possibility throughout the investigation. The evidence supporting this theory, Family history: Ray's brother Roy had died by suicide in 1996. Depression and suicidal ideation can have genetic components. If Roy struggled with mental health, Ray might have as well. Stressful career: 20 years of prosecuting criminals. Seeing the worst of humanity, dealing with horrific cases, it takes a toll. Ray had seemed tired to some colleagues in the months before he vanished. The river location. Ray's car was found near the Susquehanna River. People who plan to take their own lives often choose water. The laptop disposal. Ray's internet searches about destroying hard drives could have been related to wanting to erase personal information before dying. Perhaps embarrassing files, private thoughts. Things he didn't want found after his death. Leaving the cell phone. By leaving his phone in the car, Ray ensured he couldn't be tracked or contacted. Couldn't be talked out of his decision. No financial preparation. If Ray wasn't planning to start a new life, he wouldn't need money. The lack of financial preparation makes more sense for suicide than voluntary disappearance. But the evidence against the suicide theory was equally compelling. No body. The Susquehanna was searched extensively. Bodies in water usually surface within days or weeks due to decomposition gases. Ray should have been found if he'd drowned himself in April or May. No suicide note. Ray was a lawyer, someone who understood the importance of clarity and closure. If he planned to take his own life, it seems likely he would have left some explanation for Patty and his daughter. No signs of depression. While Ray kept his feelings private, those closest to him insisted he didn't seem suicidal. He was planning for retirement, looking forward to the future. The missing wallet and ID. Why take these if planning to die? They should have been found with the car or his body. The mystery woman. If Ray was planning suicide, who was the woman seen in his car? Why would he have a companion for a suicide trip? Suicide remained possible, but it didn't explain everything. Theory 2. Could Ray have staged his own disappearance? Could he have walked away from his life intentionally? The evidence supporting this theory. The internet searches thing. Ray had researched how to destroy hard drives, how to disappear countries without extradition. This suggests planning. The carefully abandoned car, leaving the car locked and undamaged, with the cell phone inside, seemed deliberate, like Ray was creating a false trail. The removed hard drive, destroying his hard drive, suggests Ray had something to hide and didn't want it discovered. Personal secrets, illegal activities, plans for disappearing, timing. Ray was approaching retirement. Maybe he didn't want to retire into his current life. Maybe he wanted a fresh start. The mystery woman. Perhaps Ray had been having a secret affair. Perhaps he and this woman had been planning to run away together. She picked him up in Lewisburg. They abandoned his car and laptop, and they left together to start a new life. No evidence of foul play. The complete lack of physical evidence suggesting violence could indicate there was no violence. Ray simply left. But again, there were problems with this theory. Financial unpreparedness. Ray had only $6 in his wallet. His bank accounts hadn't been drained. To start a new life, you need money. Ray didn't seem to have accumulated any. No preparation. Ray didn't sell assets. He didn't tie up loose ends. He left his affairs in disorder, which was completely out of character. Abandoning his daughter. Ray loved his daughter Laura. Walking away from her without explanation seems incompatible with everything known about his character. Professional reputation. Ray had spent his entire career building a reputation for integrity. Abandoning his post as DA, leaving cases unresolved, would destroy that legacy. It didn't fit who he was. Passport and ID. Ray's passport was at home. While he'd researched living abroad without a passport, actually doing so is extremely difficult. Where could he go? The voluntary disappearance theory had some support, but it required believing Ray was living a secret life no one suspected. Theory 3. Could Ray have been the victim of a random attack? Perhaps he stopped somewhere, encountered a criminal, and was robbed and killed. Perhaps his body was hidden so well that it's never been found. The evidence supporting this theory. Missing wallet. Ray's wallet and ID were taken. This is consistent with robbery. No body found. If someone killed Ray and hid his body in a remote location, it might never be discovered and has vast rural areas, forests, abandoned mines. The laptop disposal. A criminal might have taken Ray's laptop, realized it was traceable, removed the hard drive for potential identity theft or financial information, and thrown the laptop in the river. But there were significant problems with this theory. No evidence of struggle. Ray's car showed no signs of violence. No blood, no damage. The cell phone left behind. Why would a robber take the wallet but leave the cell phone, which has resale value? The carefully placed car. A random criminal would likely abandon the car carelessly, not park it neatly in a lot. No witnesses. Despite being in a populated area during daylight hours, no one reported seeing any altercation or suspicious activity. Random crime seemed unlikely. Theory Ford. This theory suggested Ray was murdered by someone with a specific motive, revenge, silencing him, removing an obstacle. The evidence supporting this theory. Ray's career as D for 20 years. Drug dealers, organized crime figures, violent offenders. Any of them might want revenge. The Sandusky connection. Ray's decision not to prosecute Jerry Sandusky in 1998 was controversial. Could someone connected to that case have wanted Ray's silence before he could reconsider or investigate further? The professional hit appearance. The complete lack of evidence. The missing hard drive. The careful disposal of the laptop. It all suggested someone who knew what they were doing. The mystery woman. Perhaps she was a lure, someone sent to gain Ray's trust and lead him into a trap. This theory painted a darker picture. Imagine Ray receives a call or message from someone he knows, or someone claiming to have important information. They arrange to meet in Lewisburg. Ray drives there, perhaps picking a mystery woman along the way, or meeting her there. They talk. Maybe in his car, maybe they walk somewhere quiet, and then an attack. Quick, professional. Ray is killed or incapacitated. His body is transported somewhere and disposed of where it will never be found. The killers take his laptop, remove the hard drive to ensure any incriminating information is destroyed, and throw the laptop in the river. They take his wallet to make it look like robbery. They leave his cell phone to create a false trail. They park his car neatly to avoid drawing immediate attention. And then they vanish, leaving nothing behind but questions. It's a chilling scenario. But is it what really happened? The problems with this theory. No specific suspect despite investigating Ray's enemies. No one stood out as having both motive and opportunity. The Sandusky timing. In 2005, the Sandusky scandal hadn't broken yet. Why would anyone need to silence Ray about a case from 7 years earlier that seemed closed? Lack of evidence. Professional hits usually leave some trace, witnesses, forensic evidence, something. This case had nothing. Overkill on evidence. Disposal someone and hide their body permanently. Why bother disposing of the laptop in a way that ensures it'll be found? Why not destroy it completely? The targeted hit theory was dramatic, but it had logical problems. Despite extensive investigation, police never publicly named any official suspects or persons of interest. But privately, investigators looked at several people closely. Patty Fornicola as the last known person to see Ray. Patty was naturally investigated, but there was no evidence suggesting she was involved. Her grief appeared genuine. She had no apparent motive, and she was cooperative throughout the investigation. The mystery woman, this unidentified person, became almost mythical in the investigation. Who was she? Did she even exist? The witness seemed credible, but no one else ever came forward to confirm the sighting. If she was real, finding her became a priority. But despite appeals to the public, she was never identified. Criminal enemies. Investigators compiled a list of dozens of people Ray had prosecuted who might hold a grudge. Each was investigated, alibis were checked. None panned out. Jerry Sandusky years later. After Sandusky's arrest in 2011, some theorized that Ray's disappearance was connected to the Penn State scandal. But investigators found no evidence linking Sandusky to Ray's disappearance. Sandusky was living his life normally in 2005, coaching, working with his charity. There was no indication he felt threatened by Ray or needed him eliminated. Unknown stalker or obsessed person. Some theorized Ray might have attracted the attention of someone unstable, someone who became obsessed with him. But there were no reports of stalking, no threatening letters, no concerning incidents before his disappearance. The investigation had suspects, but no suspect that fit all the evidence. By late 2005, the active investigation began to wind down. Police had exhausted their immediate leads. They'd interviewed everyone they could find. They'd searched everywhere they could think to search. Ray Grikar had been missing for 7 months. The case was reclassified as a cold case, though it remained open. If new evidence emerged, investigators would pursue it. But for now, there was nothing left to do. Patty Fornicola was devastated. She'd lost the man she loved, and she had no answers. She didn't know if she should grieve him as dead or hold out hope he was alive somewhere. Ray's daughter, Laura, threw herself into the search. She couldn't accept that her father was simply gone. She began her own investigation, following leads, talking to people, refusing to let her father's case be forgotten. The community of Center County was shaken. Their district attorney, a man who represented justice and law, had vanished without a trace. It was unsettling, disturbing. A reminder that terrible things can happen to anyone. And somewhere in a river, in a grave, in a new life, in another country, in death, was Ray Grikar. Or what was left of him. The months turned into years and Ray Grikar remained missing. For those who loved him, this was a special kind of torture. Death brings grief, but it also brings closure. A funeral, a burial. A chance to say goodbye and begin healing. But when someone vanishes without a trace, there is no closure. Just an endless, gnawing uncertainty. Is he alive? Is he dead? Is he suffering? Is he happy? Should we keep hoping? Should we let go? Patty Fornicola found herself trapped in this limbo. She couldn't move forward with her life, but she couldn't go back either. The apartment she'd shared so many nights with Ray felt haunted by his absence. His clothes were still in the closet. His favorite coffee mug sat in the kitchen cabinet. Should she pack these things away? Or would that be giving up on him? She attended support groups for families of missing persons. She met others trapped in the same terrible uncertainty. Parents whose children had vanished. Spouses whose partners had disappeared. Siblings who'd lost their brother or sister to the void. The groups helped, but only a little. Because the fundamental question remained unanswered. What happened to Ray? Patty gave interviews to local media, hoping publicity might shake loose new information. She appeared on television, holding photos of Ray, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. If you saw something, anything, please call the police, she said, her voice breaking. We just want answers, we just want to know. But the calls that came in led nowhere. People thought they'd seen Ray in Ohio, in Florida, in California, in Mexico. Every sighting was investigated. Everyone turned out to be someone else. A man who looked similar, but wasn't Ray. Ray's daughter, Laura, refused to accept her father's disappearance as a mystery that would never be solved. She was in her 20s when her father vanished, building her own life, her own career. But losing her father, losing him in such a strange and unexplained way, became a defining event in her life. Laura began her own investigation. She created a website dedicated to finding Ray. She compiled every piece of evidence, every theory, every witness statement. She posted photos of Ray, descriptions of his car, details about the day he disappeared. She reached out to other investigators, to private detectives, to retired FBI agents. She asked for help, for insights, for anything that might crack the case open. Laura was convinced of one thing: her father had not taken his own life. My father was not suicidal, she said in interviews. I knew him. Yes, my uncle died by suicide, but my dad was different. He was planning for retirement. He was looking forward to the future. Suicide doesn't make sense. So if not suicide, then what? Laura explored every alternative theory. She investigated her father's old cases, looking for someone who might have wanted revenge. She dug into his professional life, his personal life, searching for secrets. She became convinced that her father had been murdered, that someone had killed him and disposed of his body so thoroughly that it would never be found. But who and why? These questions consumed her. Ray's disappearance also created legal complications. As district attorney, Ray had been responsible for prosecuting cases. When he vanished, someone had to take over his role. An interim DA was appointed, then eventually a new DA was elected. But there were also personal legal matters to resolve. He had bank accounts, he had assets. But he wasn't legally dead. Under Pennsylvania law, a person can't be declared legally dead until they've been missing for 7 years, unless there's clear evidence of death. There was no evidence of Ray's death, just his absence. This meant Ray's estate couldn't be settled. His assets couldn't be distributed. Everything was frozen in legal limbo. Patty wasn't Ray's wife. They'd never married. She had no legal standing to handle his affairs. Laura, as his daughter, had more legal authority. But even she couldn't fully settle her father's estate without a death declaration. It was frustrating, complicated, and emotionally exhausting. The family waited 5 years, 6 years, approaching the 7-year mark when they could petition to have Ray declared legally dead. On July 25, 2011, 6 years, 3 months, and 10 days after Ray Gricar disappeared, a Center County judge made an official ruling. Ray Gricar was declared legally dead. The judge had reviewed all the evidence. The extensive searches that found no trace of Ray. The lack of any contact with families or colleagues for more than 6 years. The abandoned car. The laptop found in the river with its hard drive missing. The judge concluded that, while the circumstances of Ray's disappearance remain mysterious, the weight of evidence suggested he was deceased. The official date of death was listed as April 15, 2005, the day he disappeared. For Laura and Patty, the declaration was both a relief and a devastating confirmation of loss. Relief, because it meant they could finally handle legal matters, settle the estate, move forward with their lives in at least a practical sense. Devastating because it made Ray's death official, final, real, even though they still had no idea what had happened to him. There would be no funeral because there was no body to bury. There would be no grave to visit, just a legal document stating that Ray Francis Gricar was deceased, cause of death unknown. 4 months after Ray was declared dead, earthquake hit Penn State University. On November 4, 2011, Jerry Sandusky, the former Penn State assistant football coach, was arrested and charged with 40 counts of sexual abuse of boys over a 15-year period. The scandal was massive. It implicated not just Sandusky, but university officials who allegedly covered up his crimes. Penn State's legendary football coach Joe Paterno was fired. The university's president resigned. The reputation of one of America's most prestigious universities was shattered. As details emerged, the public learned that there had been warning signs about Sandusky for years. Reports of inappropriate behavior, witnesses who'd seen disturbing incidents, complaints that had been ignored or covered up, and then, investigators uncovered something that made everyone remember Ray Gricar. In 1998, 7 years before Ray disappeared, there had been an investigation into Jerry Sandusky. A mother had reported that Sandusky had showered with her young son and behaved inappropriately. The incident was investigated by university police. The mother was interviewed. The boy was interviewed. Sandusky was questioned. The case landed on the desk of the Center County District Attorney, Ray Gricar. Ray had reviewed the evidence. He considered the case carefully, and in the end, he declined to file charges. Why? According to the official record, Ray felt there wasn't sufficient evidence to secure a conviction. The incident was disturbing, but without physical evidence or multiple witnesses, proving criminal sexual abuse beyond a reasonable doubt would be difficult. It was a professional judgment call. Ray made it, and the case was closed. Sandusky continued working with children. He continued his charity, the Second Mile, which gave him access to vulnerable boys. And he continued abusing them, dozens of them, for another decade. When the full scope of Sandusky's crimes became public in 2011, people began asking uncomfortable questions. What if Ray Gricar had prosecuted Sandusky in 1998? How many boys could have been spared? And more disturbingly, did Sandusky, or someone protecting him, have Ray Gricar killed to prevent him from reopening the investigation? Once the Sandusky scandal broke, it became the dominant theory in Ray's disappearance, at least in the court of public opinion. The theory went like this: in 1998, Ray declined to prosecute Sandusky, but perhaps he was never comfortable with that decision. Perhaps over the years, as he heard whispers of continued allegations against Sandusky, Ray began to reconsider. Perhaps in early 2005, Ray had started quietly looking into Sandusky again. Maybe he'd heard new allegations. Maybe he'd found new evidence. Maybe he was planning to reopen the investigation. And powerful people at Penn State, people who had protected Sandusky for years, people who feared the scandal that would erupt if Sandusky's crimes became public, decided Ray had to be stopped. They arranged his murder. They made it look like suicide or voluntary disappearance. They disposed of his body so thoroughly that it would never be found, and they destroyed his laptop hard drive because it contained evidence of his new investigation into Sandusky. It was a compelling theory. It explained everything: why Ray was killed, who killed him, why the laptop hard drive was removed, why the body was never found, the timing. The media ran with this theory. Documentaries explored it. True crime shows featured it. Internet forums debated it endlessly. But there was one major problem. The investigators found absolutely no evidence to support it. After the scandal broke, police reopened Ray's case with fresh eyes, specifically looking for any connection to Sandusky. They examined Ray's files from 2005. They looked for any indication he was investigating Sandusky or Penn State. They found nothing. They checked Ray's phone records, email, computer search history, looking for any contact with Sandusky, with witnesses from the 1998 case, with anyone connected to Penn State's athletic department. Nothing. They interviewed Sandusky himself, who was now in prison. Did he know Ray Gricar? Had he ever had contact with after 1998? Sandusky denied any connection. He claimed he barely remembered Ray, had no contact with him after the 1998 investigation closed. Investigators looked for financial connections. Had anyone connected to Penn State or Sandusky paid large sums of money to suspicious individuals who might have been hired to kill Ray? No evidence of that. They examined whether any Penn State officials had a libus for April 15, 2005. Could any of them have been in Lewisburg that day? Again, nothing suspicious emerged. The Sandusky connection theory was dramatic, and it made narrative sense. A DA who declined to prosecute a pedophile later murdered to keep him silent. It was the kind of conspiracy that felt true. But in investigation, feelings don't matter. Evidence matters. And there was no evidence. Here's the fundamental issue with the Sandusky theory. In April 2005, when Ray disappeared, the Sandusky scandal hadn't broken yet. It wouldn't break for another 6.5 years. In 2005, Sandusky was a retired Penn State coach living quietly, running his charity, staying out of trouble publicly. There were no active investigations into him. No media attention. No pressure. The 1998 case had been closed for 7 years. It wasn't in the news. People had mostly forgotten about it. Why would anyone need to kill Ray Gricar in 2005 to protect Sandusky when there was no active threat? Unless, and this is where the theory gets more speculative, Ray had uncovered new evidence or new victims in 2005 that we don't know about. But if that were true, there should be some trace of it. Notes, phone calls, emails, witness interviews, something. Investigators found nothing. The most likely explanation: the Sandusky connection is a tragic coincidence. Ray made a decision in 1998 that in hindsight looks terrible. But at the time, with the evidence he had, it may have seemed reasonable. His disappearance 7 years later had nothing to do with that case. At least, that's what the evidence suggests. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. The theory can't be completely ruled out, it just can't be proven. Even after the death declaration, even after the Sandusky scandal provided a tantalizing but unproven theory, the investigation into Ray's disappearance continued. Tips still came in periodically. Someone would call the police, claiming to have information. In 2013, a person called claiming to have seen Ray in another state, living under a different name. The lead was investigated. It turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. In 2015, a hiker in a remote area of Pennsylvania discovered skeletal remains. Could it be Ray? The remains were tested. DNA analysis ruled it out. It was someone else entirely. Another sad case of a missing person finally found. In 2017, advances in forensic technology allowed investigators to re-examine some of the evidence from Ray's car. They used new techniques to look for trace evidence that might have been missed in 2005. They found nothing new. Each lead, each new piece of potential evidence, turned out to be a dead end. The psychic and the publicity seekers. As with any high-profile unsolved case, Ray's disappearance attracted attention from people claiming to have special knowledge. Psychics contacted the family, claiming they'd had visions of where Ray's body was located. Patty and Laura, desperate for answers, sometimes followed up on these claims. Every single psychic was wrong. Publicity seekers came forward with elaborate theories, often accusing specific individuals without any evidence. These accusations had to be investigated, wasting valuable police time and resources. One person even confessed to killing Ray. a confession that turned out to be completely false. The confessor was mentally ill and seeking attention. They'd confessed to several other unsolved crimes as well, none of which they'd actually committed. The noise around the case made it harder to find the signal, the genuine clues that might actually lead somewhere. Throughout all of this, Laura Griecar never stopped fighting for her father. She maintained the website. She gave interviews. She pushed police to keep investigating. She hired private investigators with her own money. She became a voice for families of missing persons, advocating for better resources, better databases, better coordination between jurisdictions. Laura was convinced that somewhere, someone knew what happened to her father. Maybe they were afraid to come forward. Maybe they didn't realize the importance of what they knew. Maybe they were protecting someone. But someone, somewhere had the answer. If you know something, Laura said in a 2018 interview, "It's been 13 years. My father deserves justice. Our family deserves closure. Please, if you know anything, talk to the police. It's never too late." Her plea was heartfelt, desperate, and painfully sincere. But it yielded no new information. As the years passed and no solid evidence emerged, investigators and amateur sleuths began exploring more unusual theories. The witness protection theory. Some speculated that Ray had been placed in witness protection. Perhaps he'd been investigating organized crime or a major conspiracy. Perhaps his life was in danger, and the government faked his disappearance to protect him. This theory had problems. There was no evidence Ray was investigating anything that would warrant witness protection. And the government doesn't typically fake disappearances, they simply relocate people. The amnesia theory. Could Ray have suffered a traumatic brain injury or stroke while driving, wandered away from his car in a confused state, and ended up somewhere with complete memory loss? It's possible, but unlikely. Someone with amnesia would eventually come to the attention of authorities, through medical treatment, police encounters, or social services. No one matching Ray's description had turned up anywhere with amnesia. The new identity theory. Perhaps Ray had been planning his disappearance for much longer than anyone realized. Perhaps he'd been stockpiling cash secretly for years. Perhaps he'd already established a new identity, and on April 15, 2005, he simply stepped into that new life. This theory required believing Ray was living a secret double life, which seemed inconsistent with everything known about his character. But it couldn't be completely ruled out. The accident theory. Maybe Ray had some kind of accident, fell into the river, wandered into the woods and got lost, had a medical emergency in a remote location. Maybe his body was in a place that just hadn't been searched. Pennsylvania has vast wilderness areas, abandoned mines, deep forests. A body could remain hidden for decades. This theory was possible, but it didn't explain the removed hard drive or the apparent planning suggested by Ray's internet searches. The perfect crime theory. Perhaps Ray was the victim of a random killer who was exceptionally good at disposing of evidence. Someone who chose him randomly, killed him efficiently, and hid his body so well it would never be found. Serial killers exist. Skilled criminals exist. It was possible, but statistically unlikely. Random killings are messy, impulsive. This disappearance seemed planned, careful. None of the alternate theories fit perfectly. Each had elements that made sense and elements that didn't. By 2020, Ray Griecar had been missing for 15 years. The case file remained open, but active investigation had essentially ceased. There was simply nowhere left to look, no new leads to pursue. The COVID-19 pandemic diverted law enforcement resources to other priorities. Cold cases, already low on the priority list, were pushed even further to the back burner. But the internet kept Ray's case alive. True crime enthusiasts on Reddit, YouTube, and various forums continued to discuss the case. They analyzed every detail, proposed new theories, argued about what had happened. Some of these online investigators were thoughtful and respectful. Others were conspiracy theorists who saw sinister plots everywhere. A podcast dedicated to Ray's case launched in 2021, bringing renewed attention. The host interviewed Laura, Patty, former investigators, and people who'd known Ray. The podcast didn't solve the case, but it kept Ray's name in the public consciousness. In 2022, Laura gave an interview on the 17th anniversary of her father's disappearance. She looked tired. The years of fighting, searching, hoping had taken their toll. I don't know if we'll ever know what happened to my father, she admitted. Part of me has had to accept that. But I'll never stop wanting answers. I'll never stop believing he deserves justice. As of 2024, nearly 19 years after Ray Gricar disappeared, the case remains officially unsolved. Ray's car is no longer evidence. It was eventually released from police custody. The laptop, or what's left of it, sits in an evidence locker somewhere, a rusting shell with no hard drive, no data, no answers. Ray's missing person file is still active in the FBI's database. His dental records, DNA profile, and fingerprints are available for comparison if remains are ever found. But as each year passes, the likelihood of solving the case diminishes. Witnesses' memories fade. People who might have known something pass away. Evidence degrades. Trails grow colder. The investigators who worked the case initially have retired. New detectives have taken over, but they're focused on newer cases, fresher leads. Ray Gricar has become a footnote in Pennsylvania's history, the district attorney who vanished, a mystery that may never be solved. Patty Fornicola has tried to move on with her life. She still thinks about Ray every day, still wonders what happened. But she's had to find a way to live with not knowing. Laura continues to maintain the website, though updates are less frequent now. She's built her own life, her own family. But the question of what happened to her father remains a shadow over everything. And somewhere in a river, in a grave, in a new life under a new name, in death's embrace, in a place no one has thought to look, is the answer to what happened to Ray Gricar on April 15, 2005. An answer that may never be found. The hard drive. Of all the evidence in Ray Gricar's disappearance, nothing has captivated investigators and amateur sleuths quite like the missing hard drive. Think about it: a laptop is found in the river, months after the owner vanishes. But the hard drive, the component containing all the data, all the secrets, all the potential answers, has been carefully removed. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't the result of the laptop tumbling down rocks and the hard drive falling out. Hard drives don't just slip out of laptops. They're secured with screws mounted in bays connected by cables. Someone opened that laptop, disconnected the drive, removed it, and took it. The question that has haunted this case: who removed it? And when? Scenario 1. This scenario suggests Ray was planning something, either suicide or disappearance. Perhaps Ray had been struggling with thoughts of ending his life for weeks or months. Perhaps he'd made the decision, set a date, planned the method. But Ray was a methodical man. He understood evidence. He understood that in the digital age, your computer holds your secrets, your browsing history, your emails, your documents, your searches. Maybe there were things on that hard drive Ray didn't want to find after his death. Not necessarily criminal things. Perhaps just private things. Personal correspondence, embarrassing searches, private thoughts recorded in documents. Or perhaps there were professional secrets, case files, confidential information. Details about ongoing investigations that shouldn't become public. Ray researched how to destroy hard drives. The searches were there in his history from his home computer. How to fry a hard drive. Water damage to computers. He was learning how to make data unrecoverable. So perhaps Ray's plan was this: drive to Lewisburg. Remove the hard drive from his laptop. Destroy it separately, maybe smash it with a hammer, maybe throw it deep into the river where it would never be found. Then throw the empty laptop into the river, leave his car parked neatly, walk to the riverbank and end his life. The problem with this scenario: Ray's body should have been found. Bodies in water surface. The Susquehanna was searched extensively. Even if currents carried him downstream, even if he got caught in debris, eventually decomposition gases would bring him to the surface. Unless he weighted himself down so thoroughly that he couldn't float. Unless he found some underwater crevice or structure that trapped his body permanently. It's possible, but it requires a lot of assumptions. Scenario 2. Maybe Ray wasn't planning suicide. Maybe he was planning to vanish and start a new life. The hard drive would contain evidence of his planning. Email exchanges with someone helping him. Research about where to go. Financial transfers. Details that would lead investigators right to him if they recovered the laptop. So before executing his disappearance plan, Ray removed the hard drive. Maybe he destroyed it. Maybe he took it with to his new life and destroyed it later. He threw the laptop in the river to create a false trail, to make it look like suicide, to mislead investigators. Then he met up with someone, perhaps the mystery woman, and disappeared into a new identity. This scenario explains the missing hard drive. It explains the careful planning. It explains why no body was found. But it doesn't explain why Ray left his cell phone behind, or why he only had $60 in his wallet, or why he showed no signs of accumulating the resources necessary to start a new life. Scenario 3. This is the darker scenario. This is the scenario that suggests murder. Perhaps Ray was killed, either in a targeted hit or in some violent encounter that ended badly. The killer needed to dispose of the body and the evidence. They took Ray's laptop because it might contain evidence linking them to Ray. Maybe emails. Maybe calendar appointments. Maybe some digital trail that would point to them. But the killer realized just throwing the laptop away isn't enough. Data can be recovered from water-damaged hard drives. Forensic experts can work miracles. So they opened the laptop, removed the hard drive, and disposed of it separately. Maybe destroyed it completely, maybe buried it. Maybe threw it into a different body of water miles away. Then they threw the empty laptop into the Susquehanna, knowing it would eventually be found but would yield nothing useful. This scenario treats the missing hard drive as evidence of premeditation, of planning, of someone who understood digital forensics and knew how to cover their tracks. It's consistent with a professional hit. It's consistent with someone who knew what they were doing. But who? And why? What could have been on that hard drive? Investigators have speculated endlessly about what information Ray's hard drive might have contained. If it was evidence of suicide planning, maybe Ray had written a suicide note and saved it as a document. Maybe he'd researched suicide methods. Maybe he'd written goodbye letters to Lara and Patty that he didn't want found because they would be too painful. If it was evidence of voluntary disappearance, maybe Ray had been corresponding with someone about starting over. Maybe he'd researched new identities. Maybe he'd been planning for months and the hard drive contained the entire blueprint. If it was evidence related to a case, maybe Ray had been investigating something sensitive, corruption, organized crime, something that got him killed. Maybe the hard drive contained case files, witness statements, evidence that someone desperately needed destroyed. If it was personal secrets, maybe Ray had been a double life no one knew about. Maybe he had secrets, an affair, financial problems, something he was ashamed of. Maybe he destroyed the drive to protect his reputation. Or maybe, and this is the most frustrating possibility, there was nothing particularly significant on the hard drive at all. Maybe it contained the usual mix of work documents, personal files, and mundane data. Maybe its removal was simply part of a plan that made sense to Ray in the moment, for reasons we'll never understand. The hard drive has become almost mythical in this case. It's the one piece of evidence that people believe would solve everything. But we'll never know, because it's gone. The witness who reported seeing Ray in his car with a woman has remained adamant about what they saw. But in nearly 19 years, that woman has never been identified. She's never come forward. No other witnesses have corroborated the sighting. This raises several possibilities. Possibility 1. Memory is fallible. The witness saw a red Mini Cooper, a distinctive car. They saw a man who resembled Ray. They saw a woman in the passenger seat. But was it actually Ray? Could it have been someone else driving a similar car? The witness was certain at the time. But certainty doesn't equal accuracy. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially when people are asked to recall details days or weeks after the fact. Maybe the witness saw someone who looked like Ray, and their brain filled in the gaps. Maybe after hearing about Ray's disappearance, they convinced themselves they'd seen him when actually they'd seen someone else entirely. It happens more often than people realize. Possibility 2. Perhaps Ray did pick up a hitchhiker. Perhaps he gave someone a ride. Perhaps he stopped to help someone whose car had broken down. Maybe this woman had a brief, innocent interaction with Ray, accepted a ride to a gas station, chatted for a few minutes, then went on her way. She might not even know she was seen with a missing person. She might not follow the news. She might have been just passing through the area. If that's the case, she had nothing to do with Ray's disappearance and has no idea she's a key figure in an unsolved mystery. Possibility 3. This is the scenario that keeps investigators up at night. Perhaps the woman was part of whatever happened to Ray. Perhaps she lured him to Lewisburg. Perhaps she was bait in a trap. Imagine this scenario. Ray receives a call or message from someone claiming to have important information about a case. Or perhaps someone he knew from the past reaches out. They arrange to meet in Lewisburg. Ray drives there. The woman meets him. Maybe she gets in his car. Maybe they talk in the parking lot. She gains his trust. She suggests they go somewhere to talk privately. She leads him into a trap. And then, violence. Ray is killed or abducted. His car is left behind. The woman disappears, never to be identified. If this scenario is true, the mystery woman's either a killer herself or an accomplice to murder. But if she's a criminal, why hasn't she been identified? 19 years is a long time to remain hidden. Criminals make mistakes. They talk to people, they leave traces. Unless she was a professional. Unless she was brought in specifically for this job and then vanished back into whatever shadowy world she came from. Possibility 4. Perhaps Ray was having an affair. Perhaps he'd been seeing someone secretly, someone Patty didn't know about. Perhaps on April 15, Ray met this woman in Lewisburg. Perhaps they had plans to run away together. Perhaps they staged his disappearance and are living somewhere together under assumed names. It sounds like something from a movie, but it happens in real life. People do abandon their old lives and start fresh with new partners. But if this is what happened, Ray maintained the secret perfectly. Not a single email to this mystery woman was ever found. Not a single phone call. Not a single financial transaction. Either Ray was extraordinarily careful, or this scenario isn't what happened. Ray's cell phone in his car on the passenger seat, powered off. This detail has always struck investigators as significant. People don't usually turn off their phones and leave them behind unless they have a specific reason. If Ray was planning suicide, why turn off the phone? Why not just leave it on? It's not like the battery life matters if you're planning to die. Unless Ray was being considerate, he didn't want Patty trying to call him. Didn't want his phone ringing in the car while it sat in the parking lot for days. Or unless Ray wanted to make sure he couldn't be tracked. Cell phones ping towers. They create location data. By turning off the phone, Ray ensured his movements after leaving the car couldn't be traced. If Ray was planning to disappear, turning off the phone makes sense. You don't want your new life tracked through your old phone. But here's another possibility: the phone was turned off by someone else. If Ray was abducted or killed, his attacker might have turned off the phone to prevent it from being used to track Ray's location. They left it in the car as a false clue, to make it seem like Ray had simply parked and walked away. The phone itself was examined forensically. The call logs, text messages, everything was analyzed. Nothing unusual was found. No threatening messages, no suspicious calls, no evidence of distress. The phone was just a phone, turned off and left behind like a punctuation mark at the end of Ray's known life. One of the most puzzling details: Ray had approximately $60 in cash in his wallet when he disappeared. $60. If you're planning to commit suicide, money doesn't matter, you won't need it. So the 60 doesn't tell us anything in that scenario. But if you're planning to disappear and start a new life, 60 is nowhere near enough. Even in 2005, 60 wouldn't get you very far. You couldn't fly anywhere. You couldn't stay in hotels for more than a night or two. You couldn't buy a new identity or bribe anyone. This suggests one of several things. Option 1. Ray had more money hidden somewhere. Maybe he'd been secretly withdrawing cash for months, stockpiling it somewhere safe. Maybe he had thousands of dollars stashed away that no one ever found. But investigators examined his financial records carefully. They didn't find evidence of unusual withdrawals or cash accumulation. Option 2. Ray had help. Someone else was financing his disappearance. Perhaps the mystery woman. Perhaps a friend. Perhaps someone we don't know about. They provided the resources, and Ray only needed pocket money for that final day. Option 3. Ray wasn't planning to disappear at all. The 60 was just what he happened to have on hand for a day trip to Lewisburg. He expected to be home that evening. He didn't need more cash. This option supports either the suicide theory or the foul play theory. Option 4. Whoever took Ray also took his wallet. The 6 and the wallet itself are missing because a killer or abductor removed them from Ray's body to delay identification or to make it look like a robbery. The 60 seems like a small detail, but in a case with so few concrete clues, every detail matters. Over the years, various experts have weighed in on Ray Gricar's disappearance. Criminal profilers, FBI profilers who reviewed the case noted several unusual elements. The case doesn't fit standard patterns. Most missing persons cases fall into recognizable categories: runaway teenagers, adults with mental health crises, victims of domestic violence, people who got lost while hiking. Ray doesn't fit any of those categories. The profilers noted that voluntary disappearances by middle-aged professional men are extremely rare. When they do happen, there's usually clear evidence of planning, liquidated assets, new identities prepared, contact with enablers. Ray showed minimal signs of preparation. Suicide by someone like Ray, no history of attempts, no syncresis. No note is also unusual but not unheard of. The profilers noted that the family history of suicide elevated this possibility, but the lack of a body was problematic for the suicide theory. The profilers' conclusion: the case was genuinely ambiguous. No single theory explained all the evidence satisfactorily. Psychologists who studied Ray's personality profile noted he was intensely private, controlled, and methodical. If Ray had decided to take his own life, he would have planned it carefully. The removed hard drive, the turned-off phone, the chosen location, all consistent with someone who wanted control even over his own death. But psychologists also noted that Ray's career gained knowledge of how investigations work. If he wanted to disappear, he would know exactly how to do it, how to avoid leaving traces, how to misdirect investigators, how to vanish. The same knowledge that would make him good at investigating crimes would make him good at committing the perfect disappearance. Experts who specialized in computer forensics emphasized how significant the missing hard drive was. In 2005, hard drives were the primary storage medium. Cloud storage wasn't widespread. If Ray's secrets were anywhere, they were on that hard drive. The experts noted that the searches Ray had conducted, how to destroy hard drives, how to damage computers, showed someone researching data destruction. But here's what bothered them: the research was somewhat amateurish. An experienced person would know you don't need to research this. You just physically destroy the drive, smash it with a hammer, drill holes through the platters, throw the pieces into different bodies of water. The fact that Ray was searching for this information suggested maybe he wasn't planning something as elaborate as some theories suggested. Maybe he was just curious. Maybe he was helping someone else with a computer problem. Or maybe Ray, despite his intelligence, wasn't as tech-savvy as people assumed and genuinely needed to research something that would seem obvious to a computer expert. Experts in recovering bodies from water reviewed the Susquehanna River searches. They noted that while most bodies surface, there are exceptions. Bodies can become trapped under logs in underwater caves, in old structures submerged in the river. Bodies can be consumed by animals, scavengers, leaving little trace. The specialist said that if Ray had entered the Susquehanna in April 2005, and if his body became trapped in some underwater structure, it's possible, though unlikely, that it was never found. But they also noted that the searches were extensive. Multiple dives, sonar sweeps, searches downstream. The chances of missing a body entirely were low. Their conclusion: if Ray went into the river, either his body was carried much farther than expected, or something unusual prevented it from surfacing. After nearly 2 decades, 3 theories remain most compelling. Theory 1. Ray, struggling with depression he never revealed to anyone, decided to end his life. He researched how to destroy evidence. He planned carefully. On April 15, he drove to Lewisburg. He removed the hard drive from his laptop to protect private information. He destroyed it, smashed it, buried it, threw it deep into the river. He threw the laptop shell into the river. He walked to the water's edge. He weighted himself down somehow. He entered the water and drowned. His body became trapped in some underwater structure or was carried far downstream, explaining why it was never found. Strengths of this theory explains the planning. The removed hard drive, the chosen location near water, the family history of suicide. Weaknesses: no suicide note, no clear evidence of depression, body never found despite extensive searches. doesn't explain the mystery woman sighting. Theory 2. Ray, for reasons we may never fully understand, decided he wanted to escape his life. Perhaps he was burned out. Perhaps he had secrets we don't know about. Perhaps he simply wanted to be someone else. He planned carefully over months. He researched how to disappear. He may have accumulated cash in ways that weren't detected. He may have had help from someone, perhaps the mystery woman. On April 15, he executed his plan. He met his accomplice. He disposed of his laptop and hard drive to eliminate digital trails. He left his car and phone as false clues to suggest suicide. Then he vanished into a new identity, possibly leaving the country. Possibly living quietly somewhere in the United States under an assumed name. Strengths of this theory explains the planning. The internet searches why no body was found. Potentially explains the mystery woman. Weaknesses: no clear financial preparation. Difficult to maintain a hidden identity for 19 years. Completely out of character for Ray to abandon his daughter. Requires believing Ray was living a secret life no one suspected. Theory 3. Someone wanted Ray dead. Perhaps it was related to a case he'd prosecuted. Perhaps it was related to something he was investigating. Perhaps it was personal, a grudge, a secret, something we don't know about. The killer lured Ray to Lewisburg, possibly using the mystery woman as bait. They killed him quickly, professionally. They disposed of his body and it would never be found, perhaps not even in Pennsylvania. They took his laptop because it contained evidence linking them to Ray. They removed the hard drive and destroyed it. They threw the laptop shell in the river as misdirection. They left his car and phone to create a false trail suggesting suicide or voluntary disappearance. Strengths of this theory explains a missing body, the removed hard drive, the mystery woman, the apparent planning and sophistication of the disappearance. Weaknesses: no clear suspect, no evidence of who would want Ray dead. Requires believing in an exceptionally skilled killer who left absolutely no trace. No matter which theory you prefer, certain questions remain unanswered. Why Lewisburg? If Ray was planning suicide or disappearance, why choose this particular town? It wasn't especially remote. It wasn't particularly significant to Ray personally. Why that day, April 15, 2005, was a seemingly ordinary Friday. There was nothing special about the date, no anniversary of tragedy, no deadline. Why did everything happen that day? What happened during the missing hours? Between 3 p.m. when Ray was allegedly seen with the mystery woman, and whenever his car was left in the parking lot, hours passed. What happened during that time? Where was Ray? What was he doing? Where is Ray's body? If he's dead, where is he? Bodies don't simply vanish into thin air. Even in cases where bodies are hidden deliberately, they're usually found eventually. Why not Race? Who was the mystery woman? This question has haunted the case from the beginning. If she exists, who is she? Why has she never come forward or been identified? What was on the hard drive? This may be the question that bothers people most. What information was destroyed? What secrets were protected? What truth vanished when that hard drive disappeared? These questions have lingered for 19 years. They may linger forever. Because sometimes, despite our best efforts, despite technology and expertise and determination, mysteries remain mysteries. Sometimes people vanish, and we never learn why. Sometimes the truth stays hidden, no matter how desperately we search for it. And sometimes the only answer we get is silence. When Ray Grikar vanished in April 2005, he left behind more than just grieving loved ones and baffled investigators. He left behind an entire community that had to grapple with an uncomfortable truth. Bad things can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. Center County had always felt safe. It was a college town, yes, with the usual challenges that come with tens of thousands of young people living and studying in concentrated areas. But it was also a place where people trusted their neighbors, where children played outside until dark, where doors weren't always locked. Ray Grikar represented stability in this community. He was the district attorney, the person responsible for prosecuting criminals and keeping people safe. He was the embodiment of law and order. And then he vanished without a trace. The psychological impact on the community was profound. If the district attorney himself could disappear, if someone that prominent and protected simply ceased to exist without explanation, then what did that say about everyone else's safety? People started locking their doors. Parents became more protective of their children. There was a subtle but pervasive sense of unease that settled over the county, a feeling that maybe the world wasn't as safe as everyone had believed. Town hall meetings were held. People demanded answers. They wanted to know what the police were doing. They wanted reassurance that there wasn't a killer stalking the streets of Center County. But the police couldn't provide those answers, because they didn't have them. The local media covered the story extensively in those first months. Every development was front-page news. Every theory was debated. Ray's face was everywhere, on television and newspapers, on missing person posters stapled to telephone poles. As time passed and no answers emerged, the media coverage diminished. Other stories took priority. Life moved on. But for those who'd known Ray personally, life could never quite return to normal. Ray's disappearance created a crisis in the Center County District Attorney's office. He was in the middle of prosecuting numerous cases. Court dates were scheduled. Victims were waiting for justice. Defense attorneys were preparing strategies based on facing Ray in court. And suddenly, Ray was gone. An interim district attorney was appointed immediately. Someone had to keep the office functioning. But the transition was chaotic. Ray had been DA for 20 years. He knew every case intimately. He had relationships with judge offense attorneys, with law enforcement officials. He had institutional knowledge that couldn't be easily transferred. Files had to be reviewed. Cases had to be reassigned. Some trials had to be delayed. Defense attorneys in certain cases tried to use Ray's disappearance to their advantage, arguing that their clients' rights were being violated because they couldn't face their accuser, because evidence was now in question, because the continuity of prosecution had been broken. Most of these arguments failed, but they complicated proceedings. The office staff was devastated. These were people who'd worked alongside Ray for years. He'd been their boss, their colleague, in some cases their mentor. They came to work each day not knowing if Ray would suddenly walk through the door with some explanation. They kept his office essentially untouched for months, as if he might return at any moment. Eventually, a new district attorney was elected. The office moved forward. New cases came in. The rhythm of justice continued. But Ray's absence was felt for years. Sometimes staff members would encounter a case from Ray's era and find his notes in the files, his careful handwriting, his methodical analysis, his strategic thinking. It was like encountering a ghost. For Patty Fornicola, Ray's disappearance was a wound that never fully healed. She'd lost the man she loved in the cruelest possible way, without closure, without answers, without even the comfort of knowing what happened. In the first years after Ray vanished, Patty's life became consumed by the search. Every waking moment was dedicated to finding him or finding out what happened to him. She cooperated fully with police. She answered the same questions dozens of times. She allowed investigators to search her home, examine her phone records, scrutinize her relationship with Ray. She understood why. She was the last person known to have seen Ray alive. She had to be investigated thoroughly. But it was painful nonetheless, having the most intimate details of her relationship exposed and analyzed. Patty gave countless media interviews. She appeared on local television, pleading for information. She spoke to newspapers, to true crime shows, to anyone who might help generate leads. If you saw Ray that day, please come forward, she said again and again. If you know anything at all, please call the police. We just want to know what happened. We need closure. But the calls that came in led nowhere. Patty attended support groups for families of missing persons. She found some comfort there, among people who understood the unique torture of not knowing. In these groups, she met parents whose children had vanished decades earlier, spouses whose partners had disappeared, siblings who'd lost their brothers and sisters to the void. Their stories were heartbreaking, but they also provided a kind of grim solidarity. Patty wasn't alone in her suffering. The death declaration in 2011 was both a relief and a new source of pain. Relief because it meant Patty could finally handle practical matters. She could grieve openly without people telling her to stay positive or keep hoping. Pain because it made Ray's absence official, permanent, real. Patty held a memorial service for Ray, even though there was no body to bury. Friends and colleagues gathered to remember him, to share stories, to celebrate his life. Patty spoke at the service. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were filled with tears. Ray was a good man, she said. He dedicated his life to seeking justice for others. He was kind, intelligent, and principled. I loved him deeply, and I will never stop wondering what happened to him. But today I choose to remember the time we had together. I choose to honor his memory, and I choose to finally say goodbye. It was the closest thing to closure she would ever get. In the years that followed, Patty slowly rebuilt her life. She dated again, though it was difficult. How do you explain to a new partner that the love of your life simply vanished into thin air? She moved out of the apartment that held so many memories of Ray. The space had become haunted by his absence. She retired from her job and tried to find peace in quieter pursuits: gardening, reading, spending time with friends and family. But even now, nearly 2 decades later, Patty thinks about Ray every single day. She wonders where he is. She wonders if he's at peace, wherever he is. She wonders if he thought about her in his final moments, whatever those moments entailed. She wonders if she'll ever know the truth. If Patty eventually found a way to make peace with not knowing. Ray's daughter Laura took a different path. Laura refused to accept that her father's disappearance would remain forever unexplained. In the years after Ray vanished, Laura became a fierce advocate, not just for finding her father, but for all missing persons and their families. She threw herself into research. She studied criminal investigation techniques. She learned about forensics, about case management, about how to keep a cold case alive in the public consciousness. The website she created became a comprehensive resource on her father's case. She posted every piece of evidence. She documented every theory. She created timelines, maps, photo galleries. But more than that, she used the website to educate people about missing persons cases in general, about how common they are, how devastating they are to families, how inadequately they're sometimes handled by authorities. Laura began speaking at conferences for families of missing persons. She testified before state legislative committees about the need for better resources, better databases, better coordination between law enforcement agencies. She became an expert on Pennsylvania's missing persons laws and procedures. She pushed for reforms that would make it easier for families to access information, to participate in investigations, to keep cases active. Her advocacy work was driven by her experience with her father's case, but it extended far beyond it. What happened my father could to anyone, Laura said in one speech. Thousands of people vanish every year in this country. Their families are left in limbo, not knowing if they should grieve or hope. We need better systems. We need more resources. We need to take these cases seriously. Laura's work made a real difference. Several legislative improvements in Pennsylvania's handling of missing persons cases can be traced directly to her advocacy. But despite all her efforts, despite all the energy she poured into investigations and advocacy and awareness, Laura never found the answer to the question that mattered most to her. In interviews, Laura has been remarkably candid about how her father's disappearance changed her. "It's shaped every aspect of my life," she said in a 2010 podcast interview. "It's affected my relationships, my career choices, my worldview. I'll never be the person I would have been if my father had come home that day." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "But I've tried to channel that pain into something productive. If I can help even one other family get answers when their loved one disappears, if I can improve the system even slightly, then maybe some good can come from this terrible thing." Laura has had to make peace with the possibility that she'll never know what happened to her father. But she hasn't given up entirely. "Part of me will always be waiting for that phone call," she admitted. "The one that says they found him, or found his remains, that finally explains everything. I know that call may never come, but I'll be waiting anyway." The detectives and investigators who worked Ray's case carried it with them for years. Police officers and detectives get used to unsolved cases. It's an unfortunate reality of the job. Not every crime mystery is resolved. But Ray's case was different. It wasn't a random crime in a high crime area. It wasn't a case with minimal evidence and no leads from the start. This was the disappearance of a district attorney, a high-profile figure. someone who should have been findable. There was evidence. There were leads. There was public attention and resources, and yet the case remained unsolved. For the investigators, this was deeply frustrating. One detective who worked the case extensively in those first months later said in an interview, "I've worked hundreds of cases in my career. Some were solved, some weren't. But Ray Gricar's disappearance is the one that haunts me. We had pieces of the puzzle, but we could never figure out how they fit together. Every theory had problems. Every lead went nowhere. It's like the answer was always just out of reach." Several investigators continued working the case even after officially retiring. They'd follow up on tips on their own time. They'd review the evidence files, looking for something they might have missed. One retired detective kept a copy of the case file in his home office. He'd pull it out periodically and go through it again, hoping fresh eyes, even his own, years later, might see something new. They never did. For these investigators, Ray's case represented a professional failure. But more than that, it represented a personal one. They'd given their word to Patty and Laura that they'd find answers. They'd promised Ray's family closure, and they couldn't deliver. That weighed on them. As with any high-profile unsolved case, Ray's disappearance attracted from conspiracy theorists and amateur internet investigators. Some of these amateur sleuths were thoughtful, careful researchers who genuinely wanted to help. They reviewed evidence, proposed theories, sometimes even uncovered information that had been overlooked. But others were less helpful. The internet gave rise to wild theories that had no basis in evidence. Ray was killed by a secret government agency because he'd uncovered corruption at the highest levels. Ray was actually a deep cover agent who was extracted back into classified operations. Ray witnessed something he shouldn't have: aliens, government experiments, something so sensitive that he had to be eliminated. Ray was part of an elite pedophile ring and faked his death to escape prosecution. These theories ranged from implausible to completely absurd. But on the internet, they gained followings. People created elaborate YouTube videos exposing the truth about Ray's disappearance. Forums dedicated hundreds of threads debating these conspiracies. For Ray's family, this was painful. Every baseless theory, every accusation without evidence, was another assault on Ray's memory and their grief. Laura sometimes tried to engage with internet communities, gently correcting misinformation and steering discussions back to facts. But it was exhausting work. People seemed to prefer exciting conspiracy theories over the more mundane possibilities, she said in frustration. They'd rather believe my father was killed by the Illuminati than accept that he might have been depressed and took his own life, or that he was the victim of random violence, or that he planned to disappear. The conspiracy theories did have one positive effect, though they kept attention on the case. Even if the theories themselves were nonsense, they meant people were still talking about Ray, still thinking about what happened. And sometimes, buried in hundreds of useless comments, there would be one genuine insight, one useful observation that investigators hadn't considered. It was like panning for gold, hours of sifting through worthless material for the occasional nugget of value. Ray's case became a fixture in true crime media. It was featured on numerous television shows, Unsolved Mysteries, Disappeared, FBI Files, and countless others. Each show presented the case from a slightly different angle, emphasized different theories, interviewed different people. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes, sometimes entire series, to examining Ray's disappearance. The medium's long-form format allowed for deep dives into evidence, extended interviews with people connected to the case, and detailed exploration of theories. True crime authors wrote about Ray in books examining famous unsolved cases or Pennsylvania mysteries. This media attention served multiple purposes. First, it kept the case in the public eye. Every time a news show or podcast covered Ray's story, there was a chance that someone with information would come forward. Second, it educated the public about the realities of missing persons cases, how common they are, how complex they are, how devastating they are to families. Third, it provided a strange kind of community for people fascinated by the case. True crime fans would discuss Ray's disappearance in online forums, at conventions, in podcast discussion groups. But the media attention also had negative aspects. Sometimes shows would sensationalize the case, emphasizing the most dramatic theories without acknowledging their lack of evidence. Sometimes they would present speculation as fact. Sometimes family members were traumatized by having to relive Ray's disappearance for yet another interview, to answer the same questions yet again, knowing it likely wouldn't lead anywhere. And sometimes the shows would unintentionally spread misinformation that then became accepted as truth by people who didn't dig deeper. Laura had mixed feelings about the media coverage. On one hand, "I'm grateful that people care enough to cover my father's case," she said. "Attention is good. It keeps the case active. It might eventually lead to a breakthrough." She paused. "On the other hand, it's exhausting to watch people turn my father's disappearance into entertainment. To see theories presented without evidence. To watch people treat his life and death like a puzzle to be solved for fun." It was a delicate balance, appreciating the attention while being wounded by how it was sometimes handled. One of the frustrations in Ray's case is how much technology has advanced since 2005. In 2005, surveillance cameras were far less common than they are today. Many businesses didn't have cameras. Traffic cameras were less prevalent. The cameras that did exist produced grainy, low-resolution footage. Today, cameras are everywhere. Gas stations, stores, traffic lights, ATMs, even doorbell cameras on private homes. Someone traveling through a town today leaves a digital trail of video footage. If Ray had disappeared in 2023 instead of 2005, investigators would have had access to vastly more surveillance footage. They might have been able to track his movements minute by minute. In 2005, cell phone technology was less sophisticated. Location tracking was less precise. Data extraction was more difficult. Today, cell phones leave detailed digital breadcrumbs. Tower pings, GPS data, app usage. All of it can be analyzed to reconstruct someone's movements and activities. In 2005, social media was in its infancy. MySpace existed but wasn't widely used. Facebook was brand new and limited to college students. Twitter didn't exist yet. Today, most people's lives are documented extensively on social media. Their thoughts, their activities, their connections, it's all available for investigators to examine. If Ray had been active on social media in 2005, investigators might have found clues in his posts, his messages, his online behavior. In 2005, DNA technology was less advanced. Forensic analysis was more limited. Today, investigators can extract and analyze DNA from samples that would have been useless in 2005. They can use genetic genealogy databases to identify unknown persons or connect individuals. All of these technological advancements came too late for Ray's case. If investigators could go back with today's technology, they might solve the case quickly. But they can't go back. They can only work with the evidence they have, evidence collected with 2005 technology. Much of it degraded now by years of storage. It's frustrating to know that if Ray had disappeared just a decade or two later, the outcome might have been different. For families of missing persons, closure is a complex concept. In cases where bodies are found, there's a definitive end. The person is dead. The family can grieve, hold a funeral, bury their loved one, and begin the process of healing. But when someone vanishes without a trace, when no body is found, when no definitive answer emerges, closure becomes elusive. How do you mourn someone when you don't know if they're dead? How do you move forward when there's always a tiny chance they might still be alive somewhere? How do you grieve when every day brings the possibility of new information that could change everything? Patty and Laura have both struggled with this. The death declaration in 2011 provided a form of legal closure, but emotionally, psychologically, the uncertainty remained. In grief counseling, Patty learned about ambiguous loss, a concept that perfectly described her situation. It's loss without closure, grief without resolution, an ending without an ending. Research shows that ambiguous loss is often more difficult to process than definitive loss. The human brain struggles with uncertainty. We crave answers, conclusions, explanations. When we don't get them, we remain in a state of suspended grief, unable to fully mourn, unable to fully move forward. Patty eventually learned to live with this ambiguity. She accepted that she might never know what happened to Ray. She grieved him as lost even without confirmation of death. But acceptance isn't the same as closure. Part of her will always wonder. Part of her will always wait for that phone call with answers. Laura, on the other hand, has been less willing to accept ambiguity. Her advocacy work is, in part, a way of fighting against that ambiguity. If she can help solve other cases, if she can improve the system, maybe eventually her father's case will be solved too. Different people cope differently. There's no right way to deal with ambiguous loss. Ray's case, because of its high profile, had ripple effects on how missing persons cases are handled in Pennsylvania and beyond. Lara's advocacy led to several concrete improvements. Better training for law enforcement on missing persons investigations, improved databases for sharing information between jurisdictions, clearer protocols for when to escalate missing persons cases, more resources allocated to cold case investigations, better support services for families of missing persons. These changes have helped other families get answers that Ray's family never received. Ray's case also influenced public awareness. Before high-profile cases like Ray's, missing adults often weren't taken seriously by authorities. The assumption was that adults have the right to disappear if they want to. But cases like Ray's demonstrated that adult disappearances can be just as sinister as child abductions. They can represent crimes, tragedies, situations requiring serious investigation. Public perception shifted, media coverage of missing adults increased. Pressure on law enforcement to treat these cases seriously intensified. In a strange way, Ray's unsolved disappearance helped solve other cases by changing how society approaches missing persons. It's small comfort to Ray's family, but it's something. After nearly 2 decades of investigation, analysis, and speculation, what can we learn from Ray Gricar's disappearance? Lesson 1. Ray was a district attorney, educated, connected, prominent in his community. He wasn't involved in high-risk behaviors. He wasn't living on society's margins. And yet he vanished completely. This teaches us that disappearances don't just happen to certain types of people in certain situations. They can happen to anyone. Lesson 2. We live in an age where we expect answers. Google can answer almost any question. DNA solves cold cases. Technology reveals secrets. But some mysteries remain mysteries. Some questions go unanswered. Ray's case reminds us that reality doesn't always provide neat resolutions. Sometimes the truth stays hidden. Lesson 3. In Ray's case, different pieces of evidence point in different directions. The internet searches suggest planning. The lack of financial preparation suggests spontaneity. The missing body suggests one thing. The carefully placed car suggests another. This teaches investigators, professional and amateur, that real cases are messy. Evidence doesn't always align. Sometimes there is no theory that explains everything perfectly. Lesson 4. The suffering of Ray's family, Patty, Laura, and others who loved him has been immense and prolonged. Society needs better systems for supporting families of missing persons. Better resources, better communication, better long-term support. The legal system that made Patty and Laura wait 7 years for a death declaration was cruel. Laws should be more compassionate. Lesson 5. Many missing persons cases have been solved because someone in the public came forward with information. A witness who didn't realize the significance of what they saw. Someone who noticed something odd. A person who finally found the courage to speak up. Ray's case remains unsolved partly because that crucial witness hasn't come forward, or doesn't realize they have crucial information. This teaches us, if you see something unusual, report it. If you have information about any case, no matter how minor it seems, contact authorities. Your small piece of information might be the key that unlocks everything. As of 2024, Ray Gricar has been missing for nearly 19 years. The case remains officially open but inactive. No investigators are working at full time. No new leads are being actively pursued. If information comes in, it will be investigated. If evidence is discovered, it will be analyzed. If someone confesses or provides credible information, the case will be reopened fully. But barring some unexpected development, Ray's disappearance will likely remain forever unsolved. The evidence collected in 2005 sits in storage. The case files gather dust. Ray's name appears in databases of missing persons, but the investigation has gone cold. Patty is now in her 70s. She's built a life after Ray, but she's never forgotten him. She still thinks about him every day. She still wonders. Laura continues her advocacy work, though less intensively than in the early years. She's made peace with the fact that she may never get answers. But she hasn't given up hope entirely. The mystery woman, if she exists, has never been identified. The hard drive has never been found. Ray's body, if he's dead, remains hidden somewhere, location unknown. The truth about what happened on April 15, 2005 remains locked away, inaccessible, perhaps unknowable. Even now, nearly 2 decades later, people debate what happened to Ray. Online forums still discuss the case. New true crime enthusiasts discover it and propose theories, some thoughtful, some outlandish. The 3 main theories, suicide, voluntary disappearance, and murder, still have their advocates. Those who knew Ray personally tend to reject the suicide theory. They insist he wasn't depressed, that it's inconsistent with his character. Those who focus on the evidence, the internet searches, the removed hard drive, tend to favor voluntary disappearance. Those who consider the broader context, his career prosecuting criminals, the Sandusky connection, tend to suspect murder. But no theory has ever been proven. No theory explains all the evidence satisfactorily. And so the debate continues, circular and endless, like a philosophical puzzle with no solution. It's easy when discussing cases like this to get lost in theories and evidence and analysis. But we must never forget, at the center of this mystery is a human being. Ray Francis Gricar was a real person. He had hopes and fears, dreams and disappointments. He loved and was loved. He made a difference in people's lives. He was a son, a brother, a father, a partner, a colleague, a friend. And one day he ceased to exist in the lives of everyone who knew him. The grief his disappearance caused is real. The suffering of his family is ongoing. The hole his absence left in the world has never been filled. When we discuss theories about what happened to Ray, we're not just solving an intellectual puzzle. We're talking about a person's life and death, about a family's trauma, about a loss that reverberates through time. Ray Gricar deserves to be remembered as more than a mystery. He was a man who dedicated his life to seeking justice for others. He prosecuted criminals, put abusers behind bars, stood up for victims who couldn't stand up for themselves. He served his community faithfully for 2 decades. He was, by all accounts, a good man who did important work. And whatever happened to him on that spring day in 2005, whether he chose to leave, whether he succumbed to despair, whether he was taken by violence, he deserves to be remembered with dignity and respect. The sun sets over Center County, Pennsylvania, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, just as it did on April 15, 2005. The Susquehanna River flows on, carrying its secrets, keeping its silence. Life continues in Bellefonte and Lewisburg, in all the places Ray Gricar once walked. New district attorneys have come and gone. Students at Penn State have graduated, moved on, been replaced by new generations. The world keeps turning, indifferent to one man's absence. But for those who knew Ray, for those who loved him, his absence is not indifferent. It's a constant presence, a question mark that shadows everything. Somewhere, in the river, in the earth, in a grave, in a new life under a new name, in the embrace of eternity, Ray Gricar exists or existed. His final moments, whatever they were, are known only to him and perhaps to one or a few others who have never spoken. The mystery of his disappearance may never be solved. The questions may never be answered. The truth may remain forever hidden. But Ray himself is not forgotten. His daughter remembers him. His partner remembers him. His colleagues, his friends, the people whose lives he touched, they remember. And now you remember him too. You've heard his story. You've walked through the evidence. You've considered the theories. You've spent this time thinking about a man you never met, who vanished before many of you were even born. In that remembering, in that attention, Ray Gricar lives on. Not in the way he would have chosen, perhaps. Not in a way that provides comfort to those who loved him. But he lives on nonetheless, in the story that won't die, in the mystery that won't be solved, in the questions that won't be answered. And maybe that's all we can do for the disappeared, for the lost, for those who vanished without a trace. We can remember them. We can tell their stories. We can refuse to let them be forgotten. We can keep searching for truth, even when we know we may never find it. We can honor their lives by acknowledging their absence. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, spare a thought for Ray Gricar, for a man who sought justice for others but never received it himself, for a life that ended, or transformed, or continued elsewhere in mystery, for all the unanswered questions, all the grief that won't heal, all the families still waiting for their loved ones to come home. And if you know anything about any missing person, any unsolved case, any mystery that haunts someone else the way Ray's disappearance haunts his family, speak up. Share one forward. Because somewhere someone is waiting for answers. Someone is waiting for closure. Someone is waiting to finally understand what happened to the person they love. Don't let them wait forever. Thank you for listening to the story of Ray Grikar, the district attorney who vanished without a trace on a beautiful spring day in 2005, leaving behind only questions, theories, and an enduring mystery that may never be solved. If you found this case compelling, please leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what theory you think best explains Ray's disappearance. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more mysteries, more unsolved cases, more stories about the people who vanished and the families who never stopped searching. Good night, stay safe, and hold your loved ones close.